adjourn. Mr. Jerome Mayhew.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We're here this evening because of Joanna, John and Ben. Joanna had autism and she was epileptic. John was autistic too, and Ben had Down syndromes. And because of their learning disabilities, they led on to mental health difficulties, and they were consequently sectioned under the Mental Health Act, sent to a private Giselle Corston Park hospital in my constituency. This is an assessment and treatment unit, and that was exactly what was meant to happen here. They were meant to be assessed and then treated with the objective of them being discharged back into community care. But that, Madam Deputy Speaker, did not happen. Joanna was kept in the hospital for 11 months before she died in April 2018. John was kept in the hospital for 24 months before he too died in October 2019. And Ben was kept in the hospital for 17 months before he too died in July 2020. All of them were in their early 30s. All of them suffered from neglect. They were neglected through uncontrolled weight gain. They were neglected through the lack of meaningful physical or mental activities. They were neglected through the effective treatment by CPAP machines, positive air pressure, to help you sleep at night. And they were neglectful of family members raising concerns on behalf of their patient family members. And worst of all, Madam Deputy Speaker, staff neglected even to attempt to resuscitate them when they were desperately needed. Joanna was found unresponsive in her bed. A nurse and 5 carers, all of them trained, they attended. Not a single one of them attempted resuscitation. She died. John had swallowed a piece of a plastic cup. He told staff himself, and I quote, "I cannot breathe. I am dying." The TV footage from CCTV proves that the staff just stood there for several minutes without attempting resuscitation. He died. The day before Ben died, it was obvious that he was extremely unwell. He had blue lips, he had blue nails because of lack of saturated oxygen in his blood. His mother was there on a visit, and she raised the alarm. She said, "You need to call an ambulance." She demanded it. The hospital refused. Even later that day, when his SATs were measured at 35%, no ambulance was called. He died. The hospital neglected the families. They neglected the expertise that they had through their experience. They've described in different harmful hospital practices excessive use of restraint and seclusion by unqualified staff, over-medication. A mother has contacted me over the last week to describe the matted hair that her child had, uncut fingernails, uncut toenails, soiled clothing piled in a corner of her room. By chance, TV footage reviewed after Ben's death uncovered a casual physical assault by a carer of him on the day that he died. He was pulled down by his arms and then slapped around the head. What have we not seen? This was supposed to be a specialist assessment and treatment unit, and yet records were not even kept by the hospital for prolonged periods. Joanna was at the hospital for 11 months. For 179 days of those 11 months, there are no records. Ben was there for 17 months. For an amazing 450 days during that 17-month period, no records were kept. So what assessment was undertaken? What treatment was given? So my first request to the Minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, is this. We need to acknowledge the scale of this scandal, the impact on real people, the most vulnerable in our society. We need to acknowledge that we should all be ashamed. But this isn't unique. We've heard this before. It sounds familiar, and that's because exactly the same thing happened at Winterbourne View Hospital. That was back in 2012. We've had the report. It was another assessment and treatment unit where people with learning disabilities and autism were abused. In the 2012 report, it criticised the development of assessment treatment units. They were, and I quote, not part of current policy and certainly not recommended practice. Containment rather than personalised care and support has too easily become the pattern of these institutions. And of course, lessons were learned. Department of Health reports described the abuse of people at Winterbourne View Hospital as horrifying. The Department of Health programme of action was agreed, and I have it with me today. The very first undertaking after the statement that we, the undersigned, commit to a programme of change. It went on to say, Health and Care Commissioners will review all current hospital placements and support everyone inappropriately placed in hospital to move to a community-based support as quickly as possible and no later than the 1st of June 2014. It didn't happen. Today, Madam Deputy Speaker, in 2021, more than 2,000 patients are still contained in assessment and treatment units. And I use that word advisedly. They are contained in assessment and treatment units. And so this is my second request to the Minister. Will she, on the behalf of the government, recommit this evening to the needed closure of all assessment and treatment units? That's what the coalition government committed to back in 2012. By 2014, we didn't do it. We need to do it now. And why do we need to do it? Well, there's the most monumental conflict of interests for these private hospitals. Because beyond being merely inhumane, there is a huge commercial incentive to maintain residency, because each of these patients came with a fat cheque, £26,000 a month per patient. And you can see where the conflict lies. You can see why one family member, when they went to Causton Park Hospital, was handed a piece of paper by another person. On it was the address of a firm of solicitors and a statement where she said, and I quote, once people are in Causton Park Hospital, you can't get them out. Patients didn't leave Causton Park Hospital. And it's structural. It's structural. If you pay a hospital £26,000 a month in order to assess and treat, is it not surprising that they don't release them? So, we've had a review, another review of this latest scandal. The Norfolk Safeguarding Adults Board review into Causton Park Hospital is excellent. I've read it, it's 105 pages, and there are 13 recommendations. And I recommend it wholeheartedly to the Minister and that the government applies them all. It's been followed by the usual hand-wringing. The responses from the agencies, action plans have been created, multidisciplinary stakeholder reviews, profound apologies have been given, and I believe them. They are profound apologies. Lessons have been learned. But in my submission, Madam Deputy Speaker, they have not. Because without a profound culture change in residential care, we will be back here again. We all know it, and the public knows it. I'll give way.
Friend, firstly, for bringing this debate on an important issue for tragic events that happened in Norfolk and for the powerful case that he's making. One of the most alarming elements of this very shocking report is the final hours with Ben that my honourable friends talked about there. Ben's mum's Gina said, if you ill-treated an animal, you get put in prison. But people ill-treated my son, and they're still free. Isn't that situation completely unacceptable? And the police and the authorities should look again at all leads and all evidence and review that and hold those people to account.
For the intervention, the honourable member for Norfolk West is absolutely right, because it's only when management teams and owners need to fear prison personally as a response to a failure in the culture. If there's a culture of neglect, if that's tolerated, by their acts or more likely by their omissions, then there needs to be personal liability. People need to fear prison, because without individuals being held personally to account for allowing this culture of indifference, then there will be no change. In this case, I profoundly hope that the most rigorous investigations are undertaken by the police and the Care Quality Commission, with a focus on individual prosecutions if justified by the evidence. There have been none to date. More generally, and widening this conversation away from the individual to the general, if we're going to restore public trust in the system, then directors need to be held to account. The Law Commission are aware of this, and they're undertaking a consultation now into the issue of corporate criminal liability. They're consulting on views as to how we can make improvements, primarily in the first instance in economic crime. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, how much more important is it to get equity where victims are the most vulnerable in society, people in care, people who cannot argue their own case because of their age, because of illness, because of their conditions? The current rules around the definition of a controlling mind are too narrow for individual prosecutions often to succeed. That legislation has been on the statute books since about 2007. There have been hardly any successful prosecutions because of this narrow definition. This needs to be changed. I'm meeting the Law Commission in October, along with the authors of the Safeguarding Adults Review report, to press the case for a widening of the definition, to make the people who run these kinds of hospitals fear for personal prosecution, because that's how we're going to change the culture. And that leads me to my third request to the Minister. If she really wants to prevent a repeat, will her department commit to making themselves a submission to the Law Commission consultation on criminal corporate liability, so that we strengthen the personal responsibility for providers of residential care? There was a Chinese general called Sun Tzu, who's very famous now, and he said, "Kill one, terrify 1,000." And he was right. The problem is that currently, families of patients are concerned. They're the ones who are fearful. They're the ones who have no confidence in the current system. They fear the consequences. We need to change that. It must be the directors of care businesses. If they allow abuse and neglect, they should be fearful. They should pay with a fear of prison sentence. And it's only then that we will get change.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I would like to take the opportunity to thank the Honourable Member for Broadland for securing this debate on this deeply disturbing, upsetting and very important topic, and for his continued work on exposing the failings at Causton Park. I would like to begin by expressing my heartfelt sympathies for the families, friends and loved ones of Joanna, John, as he is referred to in reporting, and of Ben. These are three people whose lives were cut tragically short and needlessly short. The accounts of their experiences at Causton Park Hospital, in a place that should have been there to care for and support them, are heartbreaking. I can only imagine how distressing it would have been to read about the events leading up to their deaths for their family and their loved ones. And I send Ben, John and Joanna's families my deep condolences, and I would also like to invite them to meet with me so that I can understand their experiences directly, and I would be happy for the Honourable Member to join me in those meetings. I would also like to thank those who have shared their experiences of the services and support at Causton Park, and to the Norfolk Safeguarding Adults Board for undertaking the review and preparing the final report. This is essential for shining a light on what has happened, and I know that my officials are in dialogue with the board to identify how recommendations can be progressed as impactfully as possible and as quickly as possible. And in fact, I think they met today. The appalling care and practice uncovered at Causton Park is completely unacceptable. Every person with a learning disability and every autistic person who needs it must receive safe and high-quality care, and they must be treated with dignity and respect. And I know both the Honourable Gentleman and I have dearly loved family members who have Down syndrome and know many people as well with autism, and are horrified to think that vulnerable people who put their such trust in others for support would be treated in such an appalling way. And I personally recognise and acknowledge the frustration and strength of feeling about the issues raised today. The Department is working with the NHS, with local government and with the Care Quality Commission to ensure that we identify unacceptable care with urgency and take robust action immediately. I can confirm that Causton Park closed in May following action taken by CQC, and all of the people who were inpatients at Causton Park have moved either to a supported community setting or to an alternative hospital setting where immediate discharge was not possible. And I appreciate that everyone listening will want assurance that anyone with a learning disability and any autistic person in hospital, in one of those hospitals today you mentioned 2,000, is safe. NHS England reviews of each individual person's care arrangements will ensure that there is a clear care plan in place with a clear path to discharge. This must not happen again in that way where there was no clear paths to discharge. More broadly, I welcome this opportunity to set out the work that is underway to eliminate poor quality inpatient settings and properly invest in the community alternatives that people with a learning disability and autism deserve. As the regulator for mental health hospitals, the CQC has a central role in identifying any cases of poor inpatient care and taking immediate action. The department fully endorses the increased scrutiny by CQC and its improved inspection approach, which includes spending more time with patients and their families to identify settings at risk of developing a closed culture, in particular taking more account of what their families have to say. These enhanced processes have revealed cases where quality falls below the standards we expect. Where this is the case, robust regulatory action is being taken. We must not tolerate poor care and treatment and any provider that cannot meet standards should be tackled immediately, including through closures. In the report, families describe the excessive use of restraint and seclusion by unqualified staff. Any kind of restrictive practice or restraint should only ever be used as a last resort. And on this matter, the Department is taking action to increase transparency and reporting of use of restrictive practices in response to the recommendations made by the CQC in their review into the use of restraint, seclusion and segregation. Increased transparency is a central aim of the Mental Health Unit's Use of Force Act statutory guidance, on which we have recently consulted, and work is now underway to commence the Act from November 2021. And as part of our longer-term health plans to limit the unnecessary detention of people with a learning disability and autism, we are seeking to implement once-in-a-generation reforms to the Mental Health Act. Under our proposed reforms, we will limit the scope to detain people with a learning disability or autism for treatment if there is no diagnosed mental health cause for distressed behaviour. To support this, the proposed reforms will create new duties for commissioners to ensure an adequate supply of community services and that every local area understands and monitors the risk of crisis at an individual level. For those who continue to require inpatient care, we are clear that this should be for the shortest time possible, as close to home and the least restrictive possible. Alongside the longer-term plans to improve inpatient care and support, the situations outlined in the review of Causton Park highlight the need for urgent action in quicker time. This will require cross-system, cross-government action in a number of priority areas that have historically presented blockages to progress. The government is taking action to specifically target these blockages. These range from identifying best practice models in the community to ensuring the right workforce with the right training is in place. In closing, I'd like to thank all the honourable members for their contributions on this important topic and their commitment to ensuring that people with a learning disability and autism receive high-quality care and support that they deserve. The robust inspections of the CQC are helping us identify and prevent cases of unacceptable care, such as that in Causton Park. It is our priority and my personal priority to reduce reliance on inpatient care. I have set out today the range of work that is underway to not only reduce inpatient numbers, but to drive real change in the care that is available to people with learning disabilities and autistic people to enable them to live fulfilling lives in the community, which is what we all want. All of our actions will be shaped by the Norfolk Safeguarding Adults Review report to ensure that the experiences of Ben, John and Joanna are not repeated. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is that this House